I want to start off today talking, we talked last week about the Tampa real estate stats, and this week I want to talk about the Sarasota stats. And there's some telling information here, but before you make an assumption, I want to kind of preface it by saying that keep in mind these are the stats for September that usually come out in October, and they are the stats for the month of the hurricane, which I think we all know impacted things, not just from the actuality of impacting them, but from the psychology of impact of 2 weeks of the fear-mongering and news-watching and crazy stuff going on. I think some people just got so engulfed into the storm that just the rest of their life, stopped. I think that, it caused people to go stir-crazy and all kinds of stuff.
That impact was way worse than the storm itself.
Correct.
Well, it depends on where you're at, because my friend in Naples was without power for 3 weeks, and they had flooding down there.
There were definitely some areas. The further south you go, the bigger the impact, and I think you see that in Sarasota's real estate stats. So in September of 2016, there were 535 single-family homes sold in Manatee County. In September this year, there were 422. So a 21% drop in the number of homes sold. The average sale price did go up from $332,000 to $354,000, which was nice. Month supply of inventory went from 3.7 to 4.0 months, and time to sell went up as well. Then in single-family homes in Sarasota County, you saw 16.7% drop from 635 last year to 529 this year. We saw kind of a stabilization of inventory, 3.8 months last year, 3.7 this year. Otherwise, the inventory would have been a lot lower. Time to contract, 43 days in September of this year, 32 days last year. Then you look at townhouses and condos in Manatee. 195 last year, 176 this year, so a 9.7% drop. Inventory went from 3.6 to 3.9. The average sale price went from $217,000 to $249,000, so a nice bump for townhomes and condos in Manatee County. And then lastly, townhomes and condos in Sarasota County, we saw a 13.4% drop. You went from 277 last year to 240 this year. Average sale price this year of $314,206. Last year was $277 and some change, a 13.1% increase. Months of inventory went from 4.6 to 4.5. So overall, I think we can tell that the stats impacted things pretty heavily. So nonetheless, want to kind of get you guys' thoughts. I've got Mike Yates of Atlantic Bay Mortgage, Robert Johnson that runs a listing division at my real estate team, and Richard Vasquez from Arch Insurance. And Robert, obviously, for that couple-week period, not just us, but I think the market in general, we just weren't seeing, activity. We weren't seeing a lot of leads coming through. We weren't seeing a lot of calls.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much for that, during those couple of weeks, and as Mike was saying, it was a lot before and a lot after, the phones just didn't ring. I mean, people weren't calling to ask about anything real estate related. People weren't calling in about properties to look at properties. People weren't calling in to list their proproperties, and then
they were not calling us.
Yeah,
they were calling you. Richard was getting the calls.
But even after the storm, it was probably a good 2 weeks. I mean, people were waiting to get power at that point. They were waiting to clean up. They were seeing what the damage was like, and then after that, it was piles of debris sitting on their driveway. So we went through a period where there just wasn't a lot of activity.
And I think I think sometimes people forget how emotional the home buying and home selling process is. It's super emotional.
Yeah, and nobody was calling and wanting to do anything. I mean, we got calls from sellers who were on the market, go check on my home. We were out there cutting trees for a seller. I mean, for goodness sakes, that's out of state. So it was all a lot of maintenance of properties as opposed to people calling because they were in the mindset to sell. All that mindset totally left. It was more about getting back to normal, getting power, kind of coming through the whole thing.
And I think we had to coach some people too to say, hey, look, there's going to be a little bit of a lull here. Don't get alarmed if there isn't showings for a few weeks because people are getting back into their routine. The apocalypse, didn't happen. Now they're getting back into their routine. They're getting things back to normal. Mike, did you On the mortgage side, I assume same thing. You didn't get a lot of people calling you. You
No.
were seeing a lot of activity.
Yeah, it was the same exact thing. Like Robert said, the phones weren't ringing. People had a lot of other things on their mind. We see a lot of leads come in through the internet, of course. There were 2 or 3 days where I think they were 0.
Yeah,
and
which
you
is
know how unusual
usually
that
100.
is. Exactly.
So
So people had other things on their mind than sitting around looking at homes. I had a buyer that was buying a modular home, and all manufactured housing was mandatory evacuations. They ended up not proceeding with that because they didn't want to take the risk of having to leave their home if another storm came.
Yeah.
And from my understanding, nothing at all happened to that
Yeah.
home. They just didn't want
They didn't
that
want
risk in the
fear.
future.
And then again, the 24/7 news cycle, unfortunately, is meant to just to fearmonger people, so
Right.
you keep watching. And sometimes people let that news cycle kind of run their life. And the reality is that we didn't have a lot of damage. But I also think that, and I think you guys will probably say the same thing, and I can then get Richard's thoughts. We're going to see a push of a lot of that sales activity into November and December, October, November, December, kind of when it's not normally as I wouldn't say December's usually really busy, but when it so I think we're going to see some of that sale activity, that 10 or 15% drop, or 20% drop in the number of sales that Sarasota saw and Tampa saw, comparable number. We're going to see that replaced, this year.
Right, yeah, it seems like a lot of leads are filtering back through again. I've talked to a lot of people in the last probably 3 weeks with new pre-qualifications, and it looks like a lot of people, from the buy side especially, are back to making offers on properties again. So it seems like it's picking back up. I know for my personal business, November is likely going to double what I did in October. And you guys know in our business, it's usually 30,
November's
45, 60 days out too. So,
Yeah.
The September storm is, we may not see pickup on that till the November, December, like you said.
Yeah, there was, and similarly, when we talk about that 20% drop in sales, it's similar to what we saw in, for Tampa. It was about a 20% drop year over year from last September to this September. Where I was alarmed, the statistic that was alarming to me when I looked at Tampa stats and same with Sarasota was the percentage drop month over month. August to September always see some of that though. September is generally not as strong as August, but we saw about a 35 to 40% drop in the number of sales from August to September. So
It's a big number.
that is a big number. So